Good morning, PT on Ice Daily Show. I'm Dr. Zac Morgan, division lead here with lumbar spine and cervical spine management. So they're in the spine division. Want to bring you all an episode this morning on a metaphor that I've been using quite a bit in the clinic lately, and it's been working really well. But before I do, let me frame this metaphor by calling your attention back to an episode that I did. It was back March 5th of this year. And the title of that episode was Physiology Over Physics, or Physiology Greater Than Physics. And in that episode, I talked a lot about how our clients typically have a reasonable understanding of physics just because they interact with it all day. Physics is something that's observable in the universe. You can literally see it happening. And so due to that, our clients, the way they structure their problems typically exists in the physical universe. They worry about things like wear and tear. They worry about doing too much of something and then harming themselves. They have a poor understanding of physiology or of biology and how our bodies are more of a blend between that physiological structure and the physical structure. And our bodies have the ability to sort of adapt to the stimuli given to them, where the physical universe doesn't as much. So like a building or tires, they're going to wear out at a specific rate. Your body will actually lay down new cartilage with wear. So we talked a lot about how there's some differences there. And I think that can be helpful because people just have such a poor understanding of physiology. But that podcast popped back into my head the other day when I was having a conversation with a client of mine. He gave me a call, and he had been having some health issues, and honestly, none of them musculoskeletal related. No musculoskeletal pain had showed up, but he was still just kind of curious what I thought about it. And it turned out that he had some higher blood pressure readings. He was kind of in that mid 40s range, where sometimes that starts to happen, and uninterfered with, often continues throughout life. And so he was having some higher blood pressure. He was having a little bit of anxiety, some tightness in his chest, and just some concerning health symptoms for him. Relatively healthy guy. Having these symptoms on board was really stressing him out. And so we were talking, and he had seen several doctors. He had been to several different places. And he told me, his exact words were, Zach, he's a contractor. He said, being a builder, it just feels so structural to me. I feel like something's off, and they need to figure out what's wrong so that they could fix it. And this physiology over physics conversation just popped immediately into my head of like, okay, this is a perfect example. So this gentleman, he understands pretty well how his body's put together. And in his mind, there's something wrong with that needs to be seen on an X-ray, MRI, CT scan, something that they could then go in and correct to improve the health outcomes. And unfortunately, he had all those scans. He had a lot of look at the physical structure of his body with no real explanation. And so this analogy popped into my head of I think the common one that I've always used, and shout out to Adrian Lowe, if I believe he's the one that created this metaphor, but if not, this is certainly one I've used. That classic analogy of an alarm system that I think we've all used a good bit to describe central sensitization, and how if an alarm system becomes easily triggered, then it's not doing its job as well. And all of a sudden, the wind blows near the alarm. It triggers the alarm, and it's a malfunctioning nervous system. I thought of a different analogy for the nervous system that I've used several times since this conversation, and it's hit each and every time. And I think it's because it kind of plays to the way people's minds structure things. So I was talking to this contractor. He was giving me that list of anxieties and fears related to his health. It definitely seemed like his nervous system was a bit wound up. So I just talked to him briefly about how that works. And the analogy I chose was an electrical panel in your home, because he's a contractor. He's very familiar with that world. But just for you all, if you're not as familiar in that world, thinking about how like an electrical panel works, or how electricity gets into your home, I think it makes for a really nice analogy for people. So essentially the wires hanging, in the air or underground, depending on your neighborhood, are bringing power to the neighborhood, and then your house is going to tap into that power, and it's going to feed through a panel before it goes into your home. That panel's main job is to be able to shut on or off the power from the street. So it is the main line to allow power into your home. From the panel, it then goes into a breaker where it divides into different circuits. So from the breaker, each switch on what you're classically thinking of as a circuit breaker is responsible for either a plug or a series of plugs in an area of your home. That series of plugs has a max amount of amperage that'll allow for. Usually it's 15 to 20 amps. So meaning any more than that that's plugged into that will flip the breaker because it cannot power that many amps. So the power comes unregulated from the street through the panel to the breakers and then feeds to the plugs of your homes. You'll see those divided into like kitchen, lights, HVAC, those types of things, the switches on your circuit breaker. So having an understanding of this, it parallels nicely to the nervous system because it's kind of similar to how our brain and nerves work. But where it really can become useful is talking about what it would look like if your panel was to become dysregulated. So the cool thing about panels are they work. They work perfectly. They always give you the exact amount of amps that the circuit can handle. And they're built to completely shut down if you plug in more amps than that to avoid you catching your house on fire or creating any sort of an electrical fire. They're really well built and they're really well regulated. And they're regulated to a high degree of specificity so that your home is safe and you never have to worry about plugging things in and creating a fire. Our nervous system does not have that same level of regulation, not on its own. So while our nervous system is very similar to this scenario of the panel kind of drawing power into your home, feeding it to the plugs in the nervous system being kind of the end tissues that the nervous system has an effect on. So whether that's like autonomics, where the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system are interacting with tissues or muscles of the body, or you name it, it could even be perception, how we perceive the world. Those are our plugs, if you will. The wires are carrying it back to the breaker. The breaker is our brain. So our brain has the ability to sort of regulate the whole home, which is our body. Now, our panel works perfect every single time. We never have a problem with that. But our brain, imagine if your panel in your home, imagine if you were having a bad day and the panel in your home all of a sudden down regulated. And now the plugs in your bedroom, they didn't work so well. You went to plug in your lamp, and instead of having immediate light, you get like a flickering and a little bit of light, but there's just not much power there in the plug. Or maybe you're having a really exciting day, something really good happens, and all of a sudden the panel in your home is just juicing all the plugs up, and you go to plug that lamp in and it zaps you. You get a little bit of feedback from the plug because it has so much power at its resting state. That's what happens with our nervous system. This is where physiology is so different from physics. In physics, what we have in our home, the flow of electricity is very well regulated, and it's done so to create the inability for catastrophe to happen. The way our body works, though, is it's constantly looking for regulation. So our brain, depending on the status of whatever we have going on at that time, it can upregulate. It could make all your plugs really sensitive, really heightened, hard to even use, definitely unreliable. It could make them really down regulated, where they're unreliable. You try to plug things into them, there's just not much juice coming. Or it could be just right, which is more what we classically think of. And our nervous system has this same ability. It can upregulate and stress you out. All of a sudden, all of the little feedback points of your nervous system are way more sensitive. Your pain pressure threshold goes down. All of a sudden, 2-point discrimination starts to disappear. We start to see these signs that the nervous system is malfunctioning. It can heighten or it can drop. It just sort of depends on the person and their circumstance. But the point in all of this is that electrical panel analogy works really well for people. Because after you take a second to help make sure that they understand, here's sort of how that system works in your home, they start to get it when you start to explain those kind of endpoints of the plugs and how they could be either heightened or downplayed depending on the circumstance, and tie that circumstance to whatever's bothering them. Maybe they've had bad sleep lately. They just had a newborn. They've got a ton of back pain. Maybe that conversation shifts to like, hey, understanding that poor sleep for a period of time is going to make your panel a lot more sensitive. or maybe it's stress at work and that's making their panel more sensitive. It doesn't matter. You can tie whatever is stressing that person out to this analogy and help them understand how it really influences everything. And it's more of a physiological process than it is just this simple physical one that you would see on a scan. So I hope that's helpful for you all as you describe some of this to clients. Play with it a lot and definitely feel free to tweak that analogy however you like. It just hit really well for that gentleman that was a contractor. And I feel like because so many people's brains go the direction of structural, sometimes it's helpful to be able to describe to them more of the physiological process using something that they already understand structurally. So give that one a shot. But before I close out, just want to let you all know about a couple of courses upcoming for cervical and lumbar. So for cervical, if you're looking for cervical, we've got September 7th and 8th. That's in Oklahoma City. And then October 5th and 6th, we've got two offerings. So one will be Asheville, North Carolina, and then the other will be Madison, Wisconsin. So a couple of options there for cervical, both the beginning of September and the beginning of October. If you're looking for lumbar, middle of September, the 14th and 15th, Salt Lake City, Utah. The 21st and 22nd of September will be in Simi Valley, California, and then October 19th and 20th, Boise, Idaho. So several good options there to jump into cervical or lumbar if you're looking for either one of those. That's all I've got for you today. If you have any follow-up questions or you want to kind of hash this out throughout the day, please hit me up in the comments. Love to interact with you throughout the day. Thanks.